Part 4 is all about making the robots do the hard work. With the number of screens in our lives always growing and seemingly multiplying, you want your designs not only to be beautiful, but flexible and precise. Now, if you've ever worked with somebody who's coding your designs, or you're skilled enough to code them yourself, I really recommend understanding the medium of how your designs are built. And in this lesson, we're going to be modifying the field properties and getting into auto layout, which is getting us a little closer to how your designs will actually be coded. Let's go check it out. Building automatic layouts is essentially the tool that answers the problem: how do I make my designs behave when they are built in code, or if I want to resize them and have them behave properly? Let me show you a couple of examples, and then we're going to build an auto layout together. So first is a really basic frame here where I've got the numbers 1 through 10, and there is no auto layout applied. So when I resize this canvas, you can see things are just cut off. Everything kind of stays in the same space, or if I want things to get a little bit taller, nothing really works the way that it would, or can really resize gracefully. So if this is a phone-size screen, then this stuff isn't going to respond if I want to, say, build it for a bigger phone or a smaller phone. Now, the second example here, the second frame, has auto layout properly applied to all of its elements. So when I take it and resize it, you can see that the keypad both respects the width as well as cuts off at the proper place. Also, my 1 and my 10 are stretching. And of course, if I make this larger or smaller, then things are able to take up the correct amount of space and behave like how you might expect them to if they were on the web or on a phone. So I can change that back to a phone-sized element. Let me show you how auto layout works and how you would build a layout like this. It really starts with having all the things that you want to lay out on screen and then starting to apply auto layouts to them. Now, you might be first tempted to select the whole frame, and in layout, over here, there's a little auto layout button. If you press that, you'll watch it get a little bit crazy on you. And everything is kind of trying to both be in a grid and also divided by each other, and it's not quite the behavior we want. So let's back that up and undo that auto layout and start with building each piece that we want. So first we want this keypad to be an automatic layout. So we're going to select all the elements in the keypad. And then, yes, you can come over here and press Use Auto Layout. And that's close to what we've got in our examples, but it's not quite right. When we look at this layout, we see a few things. We see the numbers are centered, they're also center aligned here, and that there's some spacing around them. Whereas if I start resizing this auto layout, everything kind of goes a little wild on me. So I'm going to just expand this box. And then over here, I'm going to add a little bit of padding. And the padding essentially gives me space to the left and the right. In this case, 20. And let's add 20 to the top and bottom too. So now I've got a little bit of space around my elements. Let's go up a little higher. We'll go 24. I believe that's what's over here. I can always select an existing auto layout and see exactly what's going on there, and it is 24. The next is the direction of the auto layout. So you can go down, you can go left to right, and in this case, we've got a wrap, which wraps the numbers around each other. After direction, we need to change the alignment. So you can see they are centered and centered. So I'm using align top left. Let's see what top center looks like. That's a lot closer. Let's do center center. And that is a lot more like this auto layout that we have here. So this is saying now, as the auto layout moves, it's going to try and keep everything center center. as it moves in response. Now these things have a gap around them. So you can come over to this gap tool and just start wiggling your mouse and seeing what they do. Very fun. And you can even go into the negatives, and that'll create its own particular effect. You've probably seen like stacked items like that before. And I'm going to dial in this number to 8. And by default, the gap that you set in one is going to be matched by the other. But if you wanted to, say, go higher, you can click in here and type 12. If I undo that, I can click in and just start using the up or down arrow. And that gives me different spacing like that. And now it's 7 and 8. But I think that looks even over there, so I'll just delete it and leave it alone. And that resets it back to auto. It's the same as going in here and choosing auto. Okay, now let's try moving this around. Okay, it's still not really behaving in the way that everything else is. So let's try applying an auto layout now to our entire frame, which is going to take this layer. So this frame, and this frame will all be auto laid out with each other. So you can really start stacking auto layouts and add auto layouts inside of other auto layouts for these effects. Here, I'm going to add an auto layout, and now this has taken on a few different properties. What I really don't want is gaps above and below this, so in padding, I'll make sure this is set to 0. Well, that looks right, but things don't quite feel the same, so maybe I'll move this until my 10 just touches the bottom. And let's see what that looks like. Okay. Still not totally right. Let's go and look at how this auto layout behaves. So when I do that here, it's not happening. So why? When you create frames and they go into an auto layout, their dimensions are automatically set. In this case, 393, or the width of a phone at the moment. I want this not to just be 393. I want it to fill its container. And now this idea of filling a container is only available inside of auto layout type tools. It's basically saying, I don't really care what the width is. I want to let the computer calculate the width based on whatever it's inside. So I'll say here, fill container, and I'll put this to fill container. And then when I try and resize this, now I've got something that's a lot closer. What's still wrong with it? Well, when I go to resize, it doesn't quite resize up and down how I want it to. And it looks like when it gets really squished that the numbers are still kind of overlaying things. Okay, so that means we need to dial in a couple more things. Specifically, we want the 10 and the 1 to also fill up and get bigger as this frame also gets bigger. So I'm going to hold down Shift and select 2 things at the same time. And for their height, I'm going to tell them to also fill the container. And then with my keypad here, I want to say, hey, I don't want anything to go past this container. And that is the clip content. So that sort of keeps my numbers inside the bounds of this container. And then you can see what should happen based on when I select 1 is that it's going to fill its width, it's going to fill its height. This keypad is going to fill the width. Its height will remain 566. It's totally centered at an 8-point gap with 24-point padding. It clips anything inside of it. And the same thing for the 10. That's filled and filled. So now when I go and resize this, what I get is the layout that I expect to get, the 10 and the 1 getting nice and big and responding from, tablet all the way down to phone. And everything is behaving exactly like how I expect. These sorts of layout tools are super, super important when you have multiple devices that end up looking a little something like this and people aren't exactly sure how to make one layout work against all sizes. But you can see now that I can make 3 copies and the auto layout is handling it all very gracefully. There's a lot to auto layout and a lot to play with. So take your time and practice building different kinds of layouts and getting really, really complicated. Auto layouts are used in all sorts of layouts, from photo galleries to video players, and there's always a little ways to cheat them. So let's say I want to add a little notification icon on one of our numbers here as a bonus. I want it to be a little circle, so I'm going to hit O and draw out a circle, and you can see by default it's trying to stay and stick inside my auto layout. But the problem with that is I want it hovering over the 6, and it just does not make any sense where it is now. I'm going to make it black. Any object inside of an auto layout can basically be pulled out and put into an absolute position. And you can do that up here with this position button. Ignore auto layout is basically CSS's absolute positioning. And now this object is inside the auto layout, but you have free control to be able to move it or put it wherever you want. So in this case, my 4 is lit up and I need to click on 4. Now, look, ignoring auto layout comes with consequences. Namely, it really doesn't care what you do. So it's a very fragile option, but sometimes when you're building a layout, this is super useful. Let me just show you really quickly a couple of other auto layout options so you can kind of see how they respond. Let's do up and down, and here I'm going to automatically size it so you can see left and right. And with left and right, I'm going to take their spacing and dial it into the negative. Now you can imagine these all being avatars. And here I might select all the objects by shift selecting, and then let's add an effect and have it be a drop shadow that actually is a little bit to the left-hand side. And you can see all these things have a little light overlapping shadow on them. So there's all kinds of interesting things you can do with auto layout that make it a really powerful tool. And it allows you to create these different layout options so that when you move them, when you resize them, or you just want to make sure they're all following a really specific rule, and you don't want to fuss with, is everything lined up the right way? This is how you get that exacting accuracy. I'm going to make this sample file available on my website so that you can play with auto layout as well. But also, I want you to realize that auto layout is going to be something that we bake in to our next step, which is components and building things for scale and reuse.